Bully kicked a single mom veteran in a diner, not knowing that tattoo marked a Delta Force Legend Act 1, The Invisible Woman, 4:47 p.m. Betty's Diner, Route 9. The diner smelled like coffee and grease and the kind of worn-out hope that clings to places where people stop between somewhere and nowhere. 4 booths along the window, a counter with 8 stools, half of them occupied by truckers and locals who'd been coming here long enough to have assigned seats. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, one of them flickering in that way that meant it would die soon, but nobody would replace it. She sat in the last booth, the one in the corner, where the fluorescent light was dimmest and the vinyl seat was patched with duct tape. Her name was Rachel Garrett, though she went by just Rachel now, and she sat with her back to the wall the way she'd sat in every restaurant, every waiting room, every public space for the last 8 years. Habit, training, survival instinct that never fully shut off even when you wanted it to. 36 years old, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, longer than it had been in years, grown out specifically to cover the left side of her neck, where a scar ran from her ear to her collarbone. Gray hoodie, clean but faded from too many washes, jeans with a small tear at the knee, sneakers that needed replacing but would have to last another few months. Everything about her appearance said, invisible. That was intentional. Across from her, in the opposite side of the booth, sat her son, Dylan, 7 years old. Dark hair like hers, big brown eyes that watched everything with the kind of wariness kids develop when they grow up poor. He was coloring on the back of a kid's menu with crayons the waitress had brought, drawing robots and spaceships and things that flew away from Earth. On the table between them, 1 plate of chicken fingers and fries, 1 glass of water, 1 glass of chocolate milk. Rachel watched Dylan eat, taking small bites of a fry herself when he offered, but mostly just watching, making sure he ate enough. The meal was $7.99. She had $12 left until payday on Friday. Payday was 3 days away. This meal would be dinner for him and breakfast for her tomorrow, if she split it right. "Mom, aren't you hungry?" Dylan asked, pushing the plate toward her. "I had a big lunch, buddy. You eat." It was a lie. Lunch had been half a peanut butter sandwich at the factory where she worked, the morning shift assembling electronics components. But Dylan didn't need to know that. Kids worried when they knew their parents were hungry. The diner was busy for a Wednesday afternoon, locals getting off work, travelers stopping for coffee and directions. The usual rhythm of a place that existed primarily because it was between 2 larger towns and people needed somewhere to stop. Rachel recognized a few faces. The trucker at the counter who always ordered meatloaf, the elderly couple in the second booth who came every week at the same time, the waitress whose name was Linda and who had stopped asking Rachel if she wanted anything beyond water. Rachel sipped her water and watched Dylan color and tried not to think about the bills stacked on her kitchen counter. Rent was due in 5 days. The car needed an oil change it wasn't going to get. Dylan's school was asking for money for a field trip she couldn't afford. Every month was a calculation, a careful balance of which bill to pay late, which necessity to postpone, which small dignity to sacrifice. She'd been a single mother for 5 years. Dylan's father had left when the pregnancy test came back positive, and she'd never heard from him again. That was fine. She'd raised Dylan on her own, working whatever job she could find that didn't ask too many questions about the gaps in her employment history, or the medical discharge papers she kept in a folder at home but never showed anyone. She didn't talk about the Army, didn't list it on job applications, didn't mention it to neighbors or teachers or the other parents at Dylan's school. When people asked if she'd served, and they rarely did, she gave vague answers and changed the subject. The service was behind her, buried, locked away in a part of her brain she tried very hard not to access, except on the nights when she couldn't sleep, and the memories came anyway, sharp and vivid, and impossible to ignore. Then she'd sit on the floor of her small apartment's bathroom, with the door locked so Dylan wouldn't hear, and breathe through the panic until it passed. The sleeve of her hoodie had ridden up slightly on her left arm, exposing part of a tattoo on her shoulder. She pulled the sleeve down quickly, covering it. Habit. The tattoo was small, just a symbol, really. Most people who saw it thought it was decorative, tribal art or something spiritual. They never asked what it meant. That was good. She wouldn't have told them. Anyway, Dylan finished the last chicken finger and looked up at her with those big eyes. "Can we get ice cream?" "Not today, baby." "Oh." His face fell slightly, then brightened with the resilience of children who adapt quickly. "That's okay. We can get it next time." Next time, when there was money, when payday came and the bills were paid and there was something left over. It happened sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Rachel smiled at him, reaching across the table to ruffle his hair. Next time for sure, I promise. He went back to coloring, satisfied. Rachel checked her watch. 4:53 p.m. She had to be at her second job, stocking shelves at a grocery store, by 6:30. That gave her time to drive Dylan to her neighbor's apartment, where Mrs. Chen watched him for free in exchange for Rachel occasionally fixing things around her apartment. Childcare was expensive. Barter was survival. She was about to ask for the check when the door opened and 4 men walked in. The bully, they were loud before they even entered, voices carrying across the parking lot, laughter that had an edge to it. Rachel's shoulders tensed automatically. She recognized the tone, recognized the body language. Men who'd been drinking, men who were looking for entertainment, men who would find it one way or another. The first one through the door was big, 6'2", maybe 220, barrel-chested and loud. Mid-30s, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves cut off to show off tattoos that ran down both arms. Work boots, jeans with a chain wallet, a face that was handsome in a rough way but mean around the eyes. His buddies followed, 3 of them, slightly smaller, slightly quieter, but orbiting him like planets around a sun. They took the booth directly across from Rachel's, making more noise than necessary, shoving each other and laughing at jokes that weren't funny. The big one, the leader, scanned the diner with the kind of territorial assessment men like him did automatically. His eyes passed over the truckers, the elderly couple, the waitress, then landed on Rachel. She looked away immediately. Eye contact was engagement. Engagement was risk. But he had already seen her, already cataloged her. Woman alone with a kid, quiet, nervous, easy target. "Hey, Linda," he called out to the waitress, voice too loud for the small space. "Get us 4 coffees and whatever pie you got. We're celebrating." Linda, a woman in her 50s who'd worked here long enough to know trouble when she saw it, nodded tightly. "Sure thing, Tommy." Tommy. Rachel filed the name away automatically. Always know the names, know the faces, know the exits. Dylan looked up from his coloring, drawn by the noise. Rachel put a hand on his. "Keep coloring, baby. We're leaving soon." She caught Linda's attention and made a small gesture for the check. Linda nodded and disappeared into the back. Tommy and his friends settled into their booth, still loud, still taking up more space than 4 people needed. Rachel could hear fragments of conversation. Something about a job, about someone getting fired, about how they deserved respect that they weren't getting. The usual grievances of men who blamed the world for their problems. She tried to ignore them, focused on Dylan's drawing, a spaceship now, elaborate and detailed, with flames coming from the engines. "That's really good, buddy. You're getting better at drawing." "Thanks, Mom. This one's going to Mars." "Smart. Mars is nice this time of year." He giggled. The sound made her chest hurt with how much she loved him. Linda returned with the check, $7.99 plus tax, $8.63 total. Rachel pulled out her wallet and counted out $9 in small bills, left the remaining coins as a tip. It was all she could spare. "Ready to go?" she asked Dylan quietly. He started gathering his crayons, putting them back in the small plastic bag they'd come in. Rachel slid out of the booth, standing carefully. The left side of her body didn't move quite right, hadn't since the injury that ended her military career. She'd learned to compensate, to hide the limp, but standing after sitting for too long always hurt. That's when Tommy stood up. She didn't see him move initially, was focused on helping Dylan with his jacket, but she felt the displacement of air as he crossed the space between their booths, felt the approach of someone larger getting too close. Her body went rigid automatically, preparing for threat assessment. Tommy bumped into her table deliberately, hard enough to make the water glass jump. Water sloshed onto the table, not an accident, intentional. "Oh, sorry," he said, voice thick with false apology and something meaner underneath. "Didn't see you there." Rachel looked up at him. He was grinning. His buddies were watching from their booth, smirking. "It's fine," she said, quietly, reaching for napkins to wipe up the water. De-escalation. Always de-escalate when you can, especially when your son is watching. "No, really," Tommy continued, not moving away. "I'm real sorry. Clumsy of me. You know how it is." "It's fine," Rachel repeated, voice firmer now. "We're leaving anyway." She tried to step around him, hand on Dylan's shoulder, guiding him toward the door. That's when Tommy kicked her. Not hard, not violent, just a deliberate tap of his boot against her shin under the table, enough to make her stumble slightly, enough to humiliate. The water glass, already unstable, tipped completely and spilled across the table onto her lap. The diner went silent. Rachel froze. Cold water soaked through her jeans. Dylan was staring up at Tommy with wide, frightened eyes. Every person in the diner had stopped what they were doing and was watching now. Truckers at the counter, the elderly couple, Linda behind the register, watching but not intervening. "Oops," Tommy said, grinning wider now. "I'm real sorry about that too." His friends laughed. The sound echoed wrong in the silent diner. Rachel's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel her heart rate spiking, feel the old training trying to surface. Target assessment, threat neutralization, response protocols. She forced it down, breathed slowly through her nose. Dylan was here. Dylan was watching. She couldn't afford to be who she used to be. "We're leaving," she said quietly, taking Dylan's hand. "What's the hurry?" Tommy stepped directly into her path, blocking the aisle. "I said I was sorry. You're not even going to accept my apology? That's rude." "Please move," Rachel said, voice very controlled now. "Or what?" Tommy leaned closer. She could smell beer on his breath. "You gonna make me? Little thing like you?" One of his friends called out from the booth. "Come on, Tommy, leave her alone." "I'm just talking," Tommy said, not looking away from Rachel. "Having a conversation, that's allowed, right? Or are poor people not allowed to talk in this diner?" He said, "Poor people," like it was the worst insult he could think of. Dylan's hand tightened in Rachel's. She could feel him trembling. "My son is scared," Rachel said quietly. "Please move." "Your son, huh?" Tommy glanced down at Dylan, then back at her. "Where's Daddy? He leave you? Can't imagine why." The cruelty was casual, effortless. This was entertainment to him, humiliating a woman who couldn't fight back in front of an audience that wouldn't intervene. Rachel felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, something else. Something she had learned to control years ago, but never fully killed. "Move," she said again. Quieter now. Dangerous quiet. Tommy didn't recognize the tone, didn't know what it meant. "Make me." She could have. That was the problem. She could have put him on the ground in less than 3 that then deceived. Seconds with techniques that would leave him gasping and confused. Could have neutralized the threat and walked out while his friends were still processing what happened. But Dylan was here, and there were witnesses. And she'd promised herself years ago that she would never use that training again unless there was absolutely no other choice. So, instead she apologized. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, hating herself for saying it. "We'll leave, it's fine." She tried to move around him again, pulling Dylan with her. Tommy grabbed her arm, not gently. His fingers dug into the muscle of her upper arm, right where the tattoo was hidden beneath her hoodie sleeve. The grip was hard enough to hurt, hard enough to bruise. "I didn't say you could leave yet," Tommy said, voice dropping lower. "I'm still talking to you." Dylan started crying, quiet, scared sobs, and that's when everything changed. The recognition, Rachel's sleeve had been pushed up when Tommy grabbed her arm. Just a few inches, enough to expose the edge of the tattoo on her left shoulder, a small symbol rendered in faded black ink. It looked like overlapping triangles forming a geometric pattern, abstract enough that most people wouldn't recognize it, wouldn't know what it meant. But one person in the diner did. An older man sitting at the counter, someone Rachel hadn't paid attention to, just another customer nursing coffee, suddenly went very still. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes locked onto the exposed tattoo on Rachel's arm with the kind of intensity that comes from recognition, so profound it rewrites everything you thought you knew about a situation. He set down his coffee carefully, stood up slowly, his hands were shaking slightly. When he spoke, his voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Delta." One word. Quiet. But it carried weight that made Tommy pause, made Rachel's blood run cold, made every veteran in the diner, and there were 3 others, all sitting scattered at different tables, turn their heads sharply. The old man took a step toward them. He was maybe 65, maybe 70. Silver hair cut military short, lean build that suggested he'd been in shape once and was still fighting to stay there, scars on his hands, eyes that had seen things. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, nothing identifying, but the way he moved, the way he carried himself, screamed military even decades after retirement. Tommy looked at him, confused and irritated by the interruption. What? The old man ignored Tommy completely, looked directly at Rachel, specifically at the tattoo on her arm. Where did you get that mark? Rachel's mouth went dry. She pulled her arm out of Tommy's grip. He was too distracted by the old man to resist, and tugged her sleeve down quickly, covering the tattoo. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. The old man's voice was gentle but firm. That's a task force mark, specific unit. I've only seen it twice in my life, and both times it was on operators from a classified mission in 2014. He paused. Where did you serve? Rachel's heart was hammering now. This couldn't be happening. She'd been so careful, kept her head down, kept her past buried, never mentioned the unit or the missions or anything that connected her to that life. I didn't serve, she said, knowing it was futile, knowing he wouldn't believe her. Don't lie to me, soldier. His voice had command in it now, the kind that came from decades of leading men. That's a recognition mark. You don't get that from a tattoo parlor. You earned it. So, I'll ask again. Where did you serve? Tommy was looking between them, sensing he'd lost control of the situation, but not understanding how. What the hell is Delta? The old man still didn't look at him. It's not a what, it's a who. And if this woman has that mark, you've made a very serious mistake. Rachel closed her eyes briefly, opened them, looked at the old man and saw recognition there, not of her specifically, but of what she represented, what she'd been. Task Force Sentinel, she said quietly. 2012 through 2015, discharged medical, classified injury. The old man's expression changed completely, went from stern assessment to something close to shock. Sentinel. You were with Sentinel. Yes, sir. What was your role? She didn't want to answer, didn't want Dylan to hear this, didn't want these people to know what she'd been. But the old man was military, and when senior ranks asked direct questions, you answered. Breacher and close protection, she said. Specialist team, Tier 1 operations. The diner had gone completely silent now. Even Tommy had stopped talking, sensing something was happening that he didn't understand. The old man studied her for a long moment, then did something that made Rachel's chest tighten. He came to attention and saluted her. Colonel Marcus Webb, retired, Special Operations Command, it's an honor. Rachel didn't return the salute. Couldn't. Not here, not with Dylan watching, and civilians staring, and her entire carefully constructed invisibility shattered. I'm not active duty, sir. Haven't been for 8 years. Doesn't matter. Webb lowered his hand but didn't relax his posture. I know what Sentinel did. I know what mission that mark represents. You and your team saved 73 men at Objective Rhino. The official record says it was a different unit, but I was read into the real report. I know it was Sentinel. I know it was you. Tommy finally found his voice. What the hell are you talking about? Webb turned to him slowly, and the look on his face made Tommy take an involuntary step backward. What I'm talking about is that you just assaulted one of the most highly trained special operations soldiers this country has ever produced. What I'm talking about is that the woman you just kicked and grabbed is a Delta Force operator who's probably killed more enemy combatants than you've had hot meals. What I'm talking about is that you're very, very lucky she has better self-control than I would in her situation. The color drained from Tommy's face. Webb looked around the diner, addressing everyone now. Anyone here have a phone? I need someone to call the police. This man just committed assault and battery on a decorated veteran. Linda was already dialing, hands shaking. Rachel felt like the walls were closing in. This was exactly what she'd spent 8 years trying to avoid. Attention, recognition, people knowing what she'd been. She pulled Dylan closer, trying to shield him from all of it. Sir, she said quietly to Webb, I appreciate this, but I really need to leave. You're not leaving until the police arrive and file a report, Webb said firmly. And neither is he. He pointed at Tommy, who was now standing frozen, looking between Rachel and Webb like he'd stepped into a nightmare. One of Tommy's friends spoke up nervously. We should go, man. Nobody's going anywhere, Webb said. And there was enough command authority in his voice that all 4 men stayed exactly where they were. Rachel sat back down in the booth, pulling Dylan onto her lap even though he was getting too big for it. He buried his face in her shoulder, still crying quietly. She held him and tried to breathe through the panic attack that was building in her chest. This was it. The exposure she'd been dreading. The moment when her past caught up with her present and destroyed the fragile peace she'd built. Webb sat down across from her, giving her space but staying close. "I'm sorry. I know you were trying to stay quiet, but I couldn't let that slide." "It's fine," Rachel said, voice tight. "It's not fine, and you know it's not." Webb's voice was gentle. "Now, how long have you been out? 8 years? Working?" "2 jobs, factory work and retail." "Jesus Christ," Webb rubbed his face. Do you have VA benefits, disability rating?" "I don't use them." "Why the hell not?" "Because I don't want questions," Rachel said bluntly. "I don't want people knowing what I did. I don't want my son growing up knowing his mother killed people for a living." Dylan shifted in her lap, but didn't look up. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then, "The people you killed were trying to kill our people. That's not murder. That's war." "It's still blood on my hands," Rachel said quietly, "and I'm trying to wash it off. By working 2 jobs and living in poverty, by letting men like him," Webb gestured at Tommy, "humiliate you in public, that's not washing off blood. That's punishing yourself for surviving." Rachel didn't respond, couldn't, because he was right and she knew it. Sirens approached in the distance. The police were coming. Act 2. The Reckoning, the Police. 2 patrol cars arrived within 5 minutes, lights flashing but sirens off by the time they pulled into the parking lot. 4 officers entered the diner. 2 local police, 2 county sheriff's deputies. Standard response for an assault call at a public establishment. The lead officer was a sergeant in his 40s, stocky and professional, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many domestic disputes and bar fights. His name tag read Morrison. He scanned the diner, taking in the scene. The frozen customers, the nervous group of men in one booth, the woman with a child in another booth, and the older man who'd positioned himself between the 2 groups like a barrier. "Who called this in?" Morrison asked. Linda raised her hand from behind the register. "I did. That man there," she pointed at Tommy, "assaulted that woman." Morrison walked over to Tommy, who was trying very hard to look innocent and failing. "That true?" "I barely touched her," Tommy said defensively. "It was an accident. She's making a big deal out of nothing." "He kicked her," Linda said firmly, then grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "I saw the whole thing." Morrison turned to Rachel. "Ma'am, is that accurate?" Rachel hesitated. Dylan was still on her lap, face buried in her shoulder. She didn't want this. Didn't want police reports and statements and attention. Just wanted to leave and pretend this never happened. But Webb spoke before she could. "Sergeant Morrison, my name is Colonel Marcus Webb, U.S. Army retired, Special Operations Command. I witnessed the assault. This man," he pointed at Tommy, "deliberately bumped her table, kicked her shin, spilled water on her, and then physically restrained her when she tried to leave with her son. Multiple witnesses, clear case of assault and battery." Morrison's eyebrows went up slightly at the military credentials, but he stayed. "Professional? Colonel, I appreciate the statement, but I need to hear from the victim." He turned back to Rachel, taking in her appearance for the first time. The worn clothes, the defensive posture, the way she was holding her son like a shield. "Ma'am, I need you to tell me what happened, in your own words." Rachel took a breath. "He bumped my table, spilled my water. I tried to leave and he blocked the aisle. Then he grabbed my arm when I tried to go around him." "Did he threaten you verbally?" "He made comments about me being poor, about my son's father leaving." Her voice was very controlled, very flat. "Nothing explicitly threatening. But he did grab you?" "Yes." "Hard enough to hurt?" Rachel rolled up her sleeve slowly, exposing her left arm. Finger-shaped bruises were already forming where Tommy had gripped her, dark purple against pale skin. And there, just above the bruises, visible to everyone now, the tattoo. Morrison saw it, didn't recognize it. But one of the deputies, a younger man, maybe late 20s, went very still, stared at the mark. His own sleeve shifted slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo that matched the pattern of a military unit insignia. "Ma'am," the deputy said quietly, "what unit were you with?" Rachel met his eyes, saw recognition there, saw the same kind of knowledge Webb had shown. Another veteran. Of course. "I'd rather not say," she said carefully. "That's a JSOC mark," the deputy said, voice dropping even lower. "Joint Special Operations Command. I was with 75th Ranger Regiment, Deployed 3 times. I've seen marks like that. They're not standard issue. Morrison looked between them, confused. Someone want to explain what's going on? Webb stood and walked over to the sergeant, speaking quietly but firmly. What's going on, Sergeant, is that this woman is a highly decorated special operations veteran who served in classified units and earned that mark through extraordinary service in combat. She's also a single mother working 2 jobs to support her kid. And that jackass over there thought it would be fun to assault her in a public place because she looked like an easy target. Morrison's expression hardened. He turned to Tommy. Stand up. What? Why? Stand up. Now. Tommy stood reluctantly. His buddies were inching toward the door, trying to distance themselves. Morrison pulled out handcuffs. You're under arrest for assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent. Are you kidding me? Tommy's voice went up an octave. Over a bump and a little grab? This is bullshit. You assaulted a veteran, Morrison said flatly, clicking the cuffs into place, in front of multiple witnesses, including a law enforcement officer and a senior military official. There's nothing little about this. The deputy who had recognized Rachel's tattoo came over to her booth, crouching down so he was eye level with Dylan. Hey, buddy, you okay? Dylan nodded, still not speaking. The deputy looked up at Rachel. Ma'am, I'm Deputy Carter. I serve too. Different unit, but I know what JSOC means. I know what kind of work you did. He paused. Thank you for your service, and I'm sorry this happened. Rachel nodded, throat tight. Thank you. Do you want to press charges? Full charges, I mean. Not just the assault, but we can add menacing, harassment, child endangerment since your son was present. I just want to go home, Rachel said quietly. I understand. But if you don't press charges, he walks in 24 hours and faces no consequences. Carter's voice was gentle but firm. Men like that, they don't learn unless there are consequences. Rachel looked at Tommy, who was being led toward the door in handcuffs, still protesting loudly. Looked at Dylan, who was finally peeking out from her shoulder to watch what was happening. Looked at Webb, who was watching her, with something like concern. Full charges, she said finally. I want him prosecuted. Carter nodded and stood. I'll need you to come to the station and make an official statement. Tonight, if possible. Tomorrow morning at the latest. I have to work tonight. What time? 6:30. Carter checked his watch. It's 5:15 now. If we do this fast, you can still make your shift. We'll expedite the paperwork. Rachel nodded. Okay. Morrison had Tommy outside now, loading him into the back of a patrol car. Tommy's friends were being questioned by the other deputy, all of them looking nervous and defensive. The diner slowly started to return to normal, or as normal as it could after what had just happened. The elderly couple paid their bill and left quickly. The truckers went back to their coffee, but kept glancing over. Linda started clearing tables with shaking hands. Webb sat back down across from Rachel. You're going to need a statement from me too. I'll follow you to the station. You don't have to do that, sir. I know, I'm doing it anyway. He paused. After this is done, we need to talk. About your benefits, about what you're entitled to. I told you, I know what you told me, and I'm telling you that you're being stubborn to the point of self-destruction. Webb's voice was firm but not unkind. You served this country at the highest level. You earned benefits that would make your life significantly easier, and you're refusing them out of some misplaced sense of guilt or need for anonymity. That needs to stop. Rachel looked down at Dylan, who was watching Webb with curious eyes. My son doesn't know about what I did. Then maybe it's time he learned, Webb said gently. Not the classified details, but that his mother is a hero, that she served with honor, that she saved lives. I also took lives, Rachel said quietly, in defense of others. That's not the same thing as murder, and you know it. Dylan spoke for the first time, voice small and uncertain. Mom, were you a soldier? Rachel's eyes burned. She looked at her son, 7 years old, too young to understand the weight of war, but old enough to know when his mother was hurting. Yes, baby, I was a soldier. Like the ones in movies? Sort of, but different. Were you brave? Rachel's throat closed up. Webb answered for her. She was the bravest, the very best. Dylan looked up at his mother with wide eyes, and Rachel saw something there that made her chest ache. Pride. Her son was proud of her. Maybe Webb was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Act 3. The truth at the police station. The statement took 45 minutes. Rachel sat in a small interview room with Carter and Morrison, recounting the incident step by step, while a recorder captured every word. Webb sat in the hallway with Dylan, keeping him occupied with vending, machine snacks, and stories that made the boy laugh. When they asked about the tattoo, why it mattered, what it meant, Rachel gave them the basics without revealing classified information. Special operations, classified unit, combat deployment, honorable discharge after injury. That was all they needed for the report. Carter added his own observations as a witness, noting the military mark and his professional assessment that the victim was clearly trained in combat but had shown restraint despite provocation. That detail would matter later, during prosecution, evidence that Rachel had de-escalated when she could have defended herself with potentially lethal force. Morrison reviewed the statement, had Rachel sign it, then stood and offered his hand. "Thank you for your service, ma'am, and for pressing charges. Too many people let things like this slide. Thank you for taking it seriously," Rachel said. "We take assault seriously, especially when it's this clear-cut." Morrison paused. "For what it's worth, I think you showed a lot of restraint today. I've seen the kind of training Delta puts people through. You could have put that guy in the hospital. You chose not to. That says something about your character." Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She found Dylan and Webb in the hallway. Dylan was eating a candy bar and talking animatedly about spaceships. Webb was listening with the patient attention of a grandfather, nodding at all the right places. "All done?" Webb asked. "All done. I need to get to work." "What time do you finish tonight?" 11. Webb frowned. "That's a long shift after all this. You sure you're up for it?" "I don't have a choice. I need the money." "Everyone has choices," Webb said carefully. "Sometimes we just can't see them. Can we talk tomorrow, when you're off work?" Rachel hesitated. "Why?" "Because I want to help you access the benefits you've earned, and because I think you might need someone to remind you that accepting help isn't weakness." She studied his face, lined with age and experience, but kind, genuine. "I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's what you're owed." Webb pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "Call me tomorrow, please." Rachel took the card, looked at it. Colonel Marcus Webb, USA, return, followed by a phone number and email. She tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you, sir, for what you did at the diner. Thank you for your service." Webb crouched down to Dylan's level. "You take care of your mom, okay? She's pretty special." Dylan nodded seriously. "I know." The grocery store. Rachel made it to her shift with 10 minutes to spare. The grocery store was bright and cold and smelled like floor cleaner and cardboard. She clocked in, tied on her store vest, and went straight to the stockroom where pallets of inventory waited to be shelved. Her supervisor, a tired woman named Karen who'd been doing this job for 20 years, looked at her with concern. "You okay? You look like hell." "Long day," Rachel said. "You sure you can work?" "I'm sure." Karen didn't look convinced but nodded. "Okay. Dairy needs restocking. Start there." Rachel spent the next 4.5 hours lifting boxes, stocking shelves, and trying not to think about what had happened at the diner. The physical work helped. Movement was meditative, mindless, safe. But during her break at 9 o'clock, sitting alone in the employee room with terrible coffee and a granola bar from the vending machine, it all came crashing back. Tommy's hand on her arm, the tattoo exposed, Webb's recognition, the police station, Dylan asking if she'd been a soldier. She pulled out her phone and looked at Webb's business card, now creased from being in her pocket, Googled his name, Colonel Marcus Webb, decorated career spanning 32 years, multiple combat deployments, senior positions in Special Operations Command, retired 5 years ago, now worked as a consultant for veteran advocacy organizations, legitimate, credible, someone who could actually help if she let him. She thought about calling him right now, thought about asking the question she'd been too proud to ask earlier. What benefits am I entitled to? How much disability rating? Could it really make a difference? But pride stopped her. Pride and fear, and the deeply ingrained belief that accepting help meant admitting weakness. She put the phone away and went back to work. Late night. The shift ended at 11. Rachel drove home in silence, Dylan asleep in the back seat, buckled into a car seat that was getting too small for him. The apartment was dark when they arrived, a small 2-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days, peeling paint, cracked sidewalks. But it was affordable, and the neighbors were quiet. And Mrs. Chen next door, watch Dylan when Rachel couldn't. She carried Dylan inside. He was getting heavy, growing fast, and put him to bed without waking him. Pulled off his shoes, covered him with a thin blanket, kissed his forehead, and stood there for a moment watching him sleep. This perfect small human who depended entirely on her to survive. Then she went to the kitchen and looked at the bills stacked on the counter. Rent, electricity, car insurance, credit card minimum payment. The numbers swam in front of her tired eyes. Even with 2 jobs, it was never quite enough. There was always something, a medical bill, a car repair, Dylan needing new shoes. She thought about Webb's words. You earned benefits that would make your life significantly easier. She thought about the tattoo on her arm, now covered again by her sleeve. The mark she'd earned by breaching a compound in Kandahar while under fire, pulling 3 wounded Rangers out of a kill zone while her team suppressed enemy fighters from 3 directions. The mission that saved 73 men and cost 2 from her own unit their lives. She thought about the injury that ended her career, shrapnel in her back during a breach that went wrong, damaging nerves that would never fully heal. The pain she managed with over-the-counter medication because VA appointments required paperwork she'd never filed. She thought about Dylan and what kind of life she could give him if she swallowed her pride and accepted help. At midnight, sitting alone at her kitchen table, Rachel pulled out her phone and typed an email to the address on Webb's card. Colonel Webb, this is Rachel Garrett from the diner. I'd like to talk about the benefits you mentioned. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? Rachel, she sent it before she could second-guess herself. The reply came 3 minutes later. Rachel, absolutely. 2 p.m. at the diner. I'll buy you lunch and we'll talk through everything. Bring documentation if you have it. DD-24 medical, records, anything from your service. See you tomorrow. Marcus, Rachel stared at the email for a long moment, then closed her phone and went to bed. For the first time in 8 years, she slept through the night without nightmares. Act 4. The Legacy. The next day, Webb was already sitting in the same booth when Rachel arrived at 2 o'clock. He had a briefcase open on the table, papers organized in neat stacks. 2 cups of coffee waited, steam rising in the afternoon light filtering through the windows. Dylan was with Mrs. Chen. Rachel had traded babysitting hours for today's shift, so it was just the 2 of them. Thanks for coming, Webb said, standing as she approached. Old school manners. Thanks for not giving up on me, Rachel said, sliding into the booth. I don't give up on people who've earned what you've earned. He pushed one of the coffees toward her. Did you bring your paperwork? Rachel pulled out a folder from her bag. Worn manila, edges frayed. Inside, her DD-14 discharge papers, medical records from her injury, a few commendation letters. Everything she'd kept, but never used. Webb reviewed them methodically, making notes on a legal pad. Okay, let's start with the basics. You were discharged medical with an honorable. That automatically qualifies you for VA healthcare and disability benefits. Did you ever file for a disability rating? No. Why not? I didn't want to deal with the VA. Didn't want the questions. Webb nodded, not judging. I understand, but you're leaving significant money on the table. Based on this injury, he tapped her medical records. You should be rated at minimum 60% disabled, possibly higher if the nerve damage is as extensive as these notes suggest. What does that mean? It means monthly tax-free compensation. For 60%, about $1,300 a month. For 70 or 80%, significantly more, plus healthcare coverage, education benefits for Dylan, preference for federal employment if you want it. Rachel's hands went still around her coffee cup. $1,300 a month? At minimum. And that's not including back pay. The rating is retroactive to your discharge date. You've been out 8 years. That's, he calculated quickly, potentially over $100,000 in back pay. The number didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. That's not possible. It's absolutely possible. It's what you're owed. Webb set down the papers and looked at her directly. Rachel, you were injured in combat serving your country. The government owes you compensation for that injury. You earned it with blood. There's no shame in accepting it. I don't want to be dependent. You're not being dependent. You're accepting payment for services rendered. His voice was firm now. If a contractor builds a house, they get paid. If a lawyer wins a case, they get paid. You defended this country at the highest level of combat operations. You got injured doing it. The payment is disability compensation. That's the transaction. Rachel looked at the papers spread across the table, at the numbers Webb had written, At the possibility of stability she'd stopped believing was real. "How do I start?" she asked quietly. Webb smiled. "We start by filing your disability claim today. I have contacts at the VA who can expedite the process. Usually takes months, but with my help and your service record, we can get you rated within 6 weeks." "And the back pay?" "Comes with the rating, one lump sum payment." Rachel thought about the bills on her kitchen counter, about Dylan's school asking for field trip money, about the car that needed repairs, about every small indignity poverty had forced her to accept. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." 6 weeks later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday, official VA letterhead. Rachel opened it with shaking hands while Dylan ate. Breakfast before school. "Dear Ms. Garrett, your claim for disability compensation has been approved. You have been rated 80% disabled due to service-connected injuries. Your monthly compensation will be $1,933.15, effective immediately. Back pay totaling $185,582.40 will be deposited within 14 business days." Rachel read it 3 times, then called Webb. "I got the rating," she said when he answered. "And?" His voice was warm, knowing. 80%. Back pay is... Her voice broke. "It's more than I've made in the last 5 years combined." "That's what you were owed, Rachel. Every penny." She sat down at the kitchen table, still holding the letter. "I don't know what to do with this." "You do what you need to do. Pay off debt, build savings, maybe cut down to 1 job so you can spend more time with your son." Webb paused. "Maybe give yourself permission to breathe." Rachel looked at Dylan, who was watching her with curious eyes. "What's wrong, Mom?" "Nothing's wrong, baby. Everything's good. Really good." 3 months later, Rachel stood in the parking lot of the diner, Dylan's hand in hers. It was early evening, the same time of day it had been when Tommy had kicked her. But everything was different now. She'd quit both jobs, paid off her debts, moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood with a real bedroom for Dylan and windows that didn't leak cold air. Enrolled in community college to finish the degree she'd started before enlisting. Started therapy with a counselor who specialized in combat veterans. The nightmares hadn't stopped completely, probably never would. But they were less frequent now, less violent. And when she woke up gasping, she could remind herself that she was through, that Dylan was safe, that they had enough. Tommy had pled guilty to assault and served 90 days in county jail. His friends had scattered. The diner had hung a small plaque by the door. "Thank you to all who serve." Webb had become a friend, visited every few weeks, checked on her progress, helped her navigate the bureaucracy of VA healthcare and education benefits, never asked for anything in return. And slowly, carefully, Rachel had started telling Dylan about her service. Not the classified parts, not the kills or the blood or the nights she'd thought she wouldn't survive, but the parts about protecting others, about being part of a team, about sacrifice and courage, and doing hard things because they mattered. Dylan had started telling kids at school that his mom was a hero. Rachel had cried the first time his teacher mentioned it. Now, standing in this parking lot where she'd once been humiliated and terrified, Rachel felt something unfamiliar. Peace. "Why are we here, Mom?" Dylan asked. "I wanted to see it again. The place where things changed." "Because of the mean man?" "Because of the man who recognized what I was, who reminded me I didn't have to hide anymore." She squeezed his hand. "Sometimes the scariest thing is letting people see who you really are, but sometimes it's also the most important thing." Dylan thought about that. "I'm glad people know you're brave." "Me too, buddy. Me too." They walked into the diner together. Linda was behind the counter, and she smiled when she saw them. "Rachel and Dylan, good to see you both." "Good to see you too, Linda." Rachel slid into a booth, not the corner one this time, but one by the window where sunlight streamed in. "Can we get 2 cheeseburgers and fries, and chocolate milkshakes?" "Coming right up." Rachel watched Dylan color on a fresh menu, drawing spaceships again, this one heading toward Jupiter. She thought about the tattoo on her shoulder, hidden beneath her sleeve but no longer a source of shame. It represented who she'd been, and that person had been worth something, had saved lives, had mattered. She thought about the future, college, maybe a new career, maybe teaching Dylan the discipline and courage that had carried her through the hardest parts of her life. And she thought about how close she'd come to giving up completely, how one moment of recognition, one person seeing her and understanding what that mark meant, had changed everything. The most dangerous people in the room were often the ones trying hardest to live quietly, and the marks they hide were not for pride, but for survival. But sometimes, survival meant letting those marks show, letting people know what you'd endured and overcome, accepting help when it was offered. Rachel pulled out her phone and texted Webb, "Thank you for everything." His response came immediately, "Thank you for letting me help." That took more courage than any mission. She smiled and put the phone away.